Buenos días y bienvenidos a otro episodio del Hat Historian. En este video hablaré sobre un sombrero que se ha convertido en un símbolo, un icónico cultural y, de cierta manera, un estereotipo de México, el sombrero de charro. The sombrero, or more exactly the sombrero de charro, is a highly recognizable hat with its extremely large brim and has become emblematic of the country of Mexico. Originally, and often still, worn by men who work outdoors, heavily decorated versions are closely associated to mariachi musicians, and cartoon characters coming from Mexico are often depicted wearing one. Before anything else, let me talk about terminology. Outside the Spanish-speaking world, this hat is usually just called a sombrero, a Spanish word roughly meaning shadower. But sombrero is a generic Spanish term for all hats, and indeed, many other kinds of headwear are referred to as sombreros in the language. The stereotypical Mexican hat, like the one I am now wearing, is more exactly referred to as sombrero de charro, charros being rural Mexican horse riders who pioneered the hat and became most closely associated with it. So if you later hear me talking about a sombrero in this video, this is the specific type I'm referring to, and I'm just using the English language shorthand for it. Like many traditional popular hats, the precise origins of the sombrero are shrouded in the fogs of history, being a combination of multiple sources brought together for practical reasons. Its likely origins date back to the 16th and 17th centuries, with the conquest and eventual colonization of Mexico by the Spanish. Spanish settlers to the new empire brought with them styles from their homeland, which, as I discussed in my video on the cowboy hat, included wide-brimmed hats, originally intended to shield from the Mediterranean sun. Examples of what they might have worn include the sombrero cordobés, a flat, round-shaped hat which could be made of felt or straw, and were themselves descended from wide Greek and Roman hats. When arriving in the New World, many settled down with indigenous people, forming a whole new mestizo or mixed-race population, which integrated traditions from both cultures. A lot of these people ended up working on farms, but found that the Mexican sun was harsher still than the Spanish one, requiring protection. Combining European hat styles and some indigenous plants and weaving techniques, these farmhands made hats that were much wider than the original ones, with the brim sometimes extending 1.5 feet from the crown. The idea behind such a wide brim was to protect not only the head and neck, but the shoulders and some of the back as well. As time went on, these became more popular and widespread throughout central Mexico, becoming entrenched as the country developed its identity. For a while, the sombreros did not have much of a defined shape, other than being very wide. The sombrero de charro, as we now know it, is said to have originated in the state of Jalisco around Guadalajara. Again, its origins are probably a mix of influences born of tradition and practicality, but the large brimmed hat was supposed to have been adopted by the charros of the region, who, as I said before, were horsemen who liked the hat because of the protection it provided from the elements, as straw ones could protect from the sun, but felt ones could shield from the rain. For the latter, they upturned the brim slightly to redirect water in case of downpours, and then extended the style to the straw versions. The large brim and tall crown could also protect to some extent by cushioning falls. It is also they who added the often seen chin strap in order to keep the hat on when riding a horse at high speeds. This inclusion of the hat in such romantic figures cemented its place in local culture, much like the cowboy hat, incidentally descended from the sombrero, would further north. As the charro image became ingrained in public consciousness, their version of the sombrero became more defined, with its pinched crown and brim slightly upturned at the back. With it gaining this iconic status, it began to move amongst social classes, with the working charros still wearing their plain ones, while wealthier men started wearing some that were highly embroidered and decorated, sometimes made out of fine felt. Around this time, late in the 19th century, it also became associated with another Mexican symbol originating in Jalisco, mariachi bands. These bands playing traditional Mexican music are said to have originated near Guadalajara, and were sometimes composed of poor rural workers who either tried to supplement their income or did not have a farm job. They at first simply wore their regional clothes, which included the charro outfits. As this latter outfit gained in notoriety, they started to adopt it as a uniform. They would heavily decorate it to stand out at events, creating the dazzling mariachi sombrero that we now know today. The image of the charro spread to the rest of Mexico after the Mexican Revolution in the early 20th century, and with it more bands adopted the sombrero as part of their outfit, reaching the capital, Mexico City. While there are bands in different regions that wear other Mexican traditional hats, the sombrero de charro has become the most iconic, and often seen north of the border in the United States as well. This association with music and Mexican culture is further cemented by the jarabe tapito, or Mexican hat dance, which is yet another product of Guadalajara, and as the name implies, involves a sombrero. Said to represent the courtship between a poor man and a woman, with the woman repeatedly rejecting his advances before eventually consenting, it involves a male dancer wearing the charro outfit, and in the course of his courtship throwing his most precious possession, his decorated sombrero, to the ground in an act of love, with the dancers then dancing around it. This dance, originally controversial and opposed by conservative religious leaders for its deep sexual undertones, has gained such an iconic status that it was declared the national dance of Mexico, further reinforcing the Sombrero de Charro's place in the national imagery. A variant of the sombrero that is often seen, though in many cases more as part of a costume, caricature, or historical reenactment, is a pointy-crowned version with a heavily turned-up brim, sometimes called a piloncillo, or sugarloaf in Mexico due to the resemblance, that was made famous by Mexican revolutionary Emiliano Zapata. Despite coming from a reasonably well-off background, he wished to protect the image of a man of the people, and that included a charro outfit, with a distinctive large sombrero hat. The style was emulated by the followers and by fellow adversary and sometimes rival Pancho Villa. Zapata is an extremely famous and revered historical figure in Mexico, with this style of hat sometimes sold on holidays, but in day-to-day life it is rarely worn other than as a joke or a political statement, with workers preferring the more practical hats. The sombrero continues to be worn to this day, beyond musicians and dancers, in charrerias, a Mexican equestrian show and sport roughly equivalent to the American rodeos. Male performers are dressed in varyingly formal traditional outfits that include the Sombrero de Charro. It is also seen at times in international sporting events by supporters of Mexico as part of national pride. However, outdoor workers started abandoning it in the mid-20th century in favor of more practical Tejano hats that are essentially a Mexican version of the American cowboy hat, whose brims are smaller and therefore less cumbersome. Wide-brimmed hats somewhat reminiscent of the sombrero can still be seen on outdoor workers, but their shape is different than the traditional Sombrero de Charro, resembling more of a very oversized Panama hat. In cities, it is almost never seen outside cultural events or the aforementioned musicians. Nonetheless, it is a very common sight at tourist souvenir shops and markets. I got mine at a market in Mexico City, due to its deep associations with the country. There has been some controversy surrounding the sombrero in recent years in the United States, particularly around the holiday of Cinco de Mayo, as Americans, generally white, will don some to go partying and drinking. There are some that are of the opinion that wearing a sombrero is offensive, disrespectful, and cultural appropriation. Now, I am not Mexican myself, so I cannot speak with authority on their true thoughts. Plus, there are nearly 140 million Mexicans in the world, so differing opinions are bound to exist. But my feeling is that this has much more to do with the attitude and behavior of the wearers than with the hat itself. I could see how some might not be quite comfortable with this beloved part of Mexican culture being associated with inebriated frat boys downing tequila shots and yelling, "Cinco de Drinko!" before vomiting in the nearest trash can. But my impression, formed partially when I acquired the hat in Mexico and wore it, on my way back to my hotel, because what else was I going to do with it, and later when asking Mexicans I know for making this video, is that wearing the hat by foreigners in a respectful manner is not only accepted, but welcomed by Mexican people who enjoy appreciation of their culture, and no different than a non-Russian wearing a shanka, a non-Arab wearing a fez, a non-Frenchman wearing a beret, all of which I have done in this channel, though I guess it's different for the beret because I actually am half French. It's all about the respect and image given while wearing it, for it reflects upon the culture that it is associated with. This is my interpretation, though you may feel free to disagree in the comments. I'd especially prefer to hear from actual Mexicans on the subject. The sombrero is a truly iconic hat, and a recognized symbol of its home country of Mexico throughout the world, and it has even lent its name to a galaxy, the Sombrero Galaxy, due to the resemblance in shape between them. It has earned its place in culture, and will likely endure for many generations to come. So I hope once again that you enjoyed this video and will join me again soon for another hat. Until then, I tip my hat to you.